Well, basically, for the sake of redundancy, why don't you just go ahead and repeat your name and where you were born, your birth date, if you would.
I'm Morris Oklander. I was born in Iași, Romania, 1937, August 26th.
And I think maybe the easiest way to begin would be if you just think of yourself sitting here with me with a big leather-bound, old worn scrapbook that you're just flipping the pages through, and as you recall a memory or a thought, maybe just start with your childhood from as far back as you can remember, maybe your first memory.
Well, I remember living in this house, and at the age of 3, I think I had a little train out there in the yard that I could sit on. Another impressionable thing for me was I would be taken to a place that had a lot of machinery going, producing fibers. Later on I discovered that that's what my father did. He was into producing textiles. And the machineries are impressive because they made a lot of noise and a lot of things clanged and belts were whined, and those are the kind of things that you tend to remember. My father was taken away from us in the beginning of 1940. And my mother, being one of 9 children, was determined that she would go and possibly be with some of her brothers or sisters. And so, having lost my father, she decided that the best thing to do was to travel and see them and be with them. Also, my understanding is she told me that they had taken away the house and the factory as a result of the having need for textiles, which they were going to produce for use in army applications or whatever. My mother indicated to me that my father had passed away or been killed when a couple of months after he had been taken away into the army. So we started to travel from Romania into an area called Bessarabia, which is, I guess, the adjacent area that changed from time to time, either being Russian or being Romanian, depending on which years you were living there.
How old were you when you were going through this move?
Well, the middle of 1940, we started to go. Her brothers and sisters were all over the place, and we tried to get to some of these people, and at times it would take us months and months to travel a couple of 100 miles because either there were bombings or we're trying to hide out from being caught by the Germans, and sometimes being handed over to the Germans by unfriendly natives or even Jews who thought that they could get something in a favor as return for them. So primarily we would hide out in places like bombed out houses, or destroyed houses, or many times we could get friendly farmers to permit us to stay with them if they had a barn and they were willing to take the chances. Taking a chance for them meant that they could lose their lives. But there were some friendly people who actually would permit you to stay there in their barns or even in their houses. In some places, you'd find quite a few people staying in those places, in wherever they sheltered you. The only problem is being exposed to harsh weather and no medicine being available or limited amount of medicine. Many of these older people were sick, and you could stay in a place and wake up in the morning and find out that the person next to you or a few people down had died as a result of exposure or sickness or hunger.
Did that ever happen to you?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I meant. You know, is you wake up and you hear someone crying because a relative or a spouse or something that had died. That was the risks of hiding, and it was better this way than being caught. We understood, and everyone understood, that being caught meant being sent off someplace. Food, if the farmers or black market, any other way you could get it, mainly for us consisted of bread and lard and something like that, whatever was available. Apparently they learned very early. My mother did that, and she had a bag of jewelry, and I think that probably this bag of jewelry saved our lives. It meant that wherever she went, she could pull out a piece of jewelry, a piece of gold or whatever. It didn't make a difference what the value of it really was. It just, in the black market, you could do almost anything if you found the right people to be willing to exchange for you. And this bag of gold, I remember very very vividly, because it stayed with us all the way through 1947, and little pieces of jewelry came out of it on a routine basis. And as a matter of fact, later on I'll tell you about how we got out of Russia using the gold. We traveled around, and she did get to meet with her brother, with one of her brothers, who was a general in the Russian army. And we stayed there briefly. And he was away, and we stayed with his family.
In Russia?
In Russia. And he was killed very early. About 1942 he was killed. And his wife went to live with her mother and father. And so we left them. And when we left them, we got caught by the Germans.
Do you remember that experience, how it happened, or?
I do recall some of it. We were going across some road. We had gotten out from like a farm type area and walking across some road, and as we were walking down, we had some shooting and down the road. And as we got down the road, there were some people had been shot. And the next thing we knew, we were part of a whole group of people whom they had surrounded, and you know, and there were soldiers all over the place. So obviously that was what we caught. The problem they had with us is they could kill us, which I guess they had done some because there were some people who had been shot, or they could keep us. They couldn't transport us, primarily because we were in Russia, and they had no way of getting us out of there. Their transportation system was not something that they could easily handle people. We knew that they could put you in trains and set you off there, but they were surrounded and fighting with the Russians, and that was not possible for them to do for us. So they seem to have divided people. I suspect that some of the people got killed. They divided them, and they put us in. They walked us in one area, and they walked some people someplace else, and we got into a camp that had nothing but soldiers in it, nothing but German soldiers. And in this camp, they put us in this big Quonset hut. I guess it's a Quonset hut they call it. It's a big barrack-like, and there were a whole bunch of people in there, women and men, and that's where we stayed for about 2 years. And the major thing these people did was work. My mother worked in a laundry. She would be in the laundry all the time, and I recollect pushing laundry carts full of uniforms, shirts of one kind or another, and that's what I did majority of the time. Conditions in there, I guess at times were better than conditions out in trying to hide. My understanding was that the way we got there was that some people had told the Germans where we were hiding, and there happened to have been a lot of Jewish people, as I said before, who wanted favors from the Germans and thought that this is the way to do it, is to let somebody know where people were. I don't know what they got out of it, but apparently that was their way of getting some favors. So I think that's how we wound up in this camp, and they would give us food, and we knew what was going to happen, at least had some idea what was going to happen from day to day. That is, work. My mother would be able to work. My mother was, in those days, a very, very strong woman. She's was tall, and is tall, and and was capable of performing a lot of work. And I think that what happened is that those people who were able to work were used heavily, and I guess those who didn't look like they were going to work were taken away and probably destroyed. It's hard to say what they did because we never found out what happened to them. But she managed to be strong, and while other people were dying from exposure or anything else like that, but it wasn't from starvation we were dying there. We were dying from lack of medical care and exposure. They did provide shelter. And the other thing that didn't happen to us while we were in camp is you knew you could get beaten or abused, but you didn't have the fear of not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring in terms of being out someplace in a wilderness or some hiding somewhere and somebody coming up and shooting you or something like that. It became a way of life. While it was not a good way of life, it wasn't the thing you had really wanted to have happen to you. It was steady. It was there. I think by about 1945, the Russians released us. Remember Russians coming in there and had released us from that camp.
So then you were about 8 years old?
Yeah. And we proceeded to go back. This camp was in Bershad, which was like a borderline Poland, Russia. And my mother, being released, decided that maybe we would go back to Romania, the Yashi, and try to locate the house and the factory, and perhaps she could get it back, and we could resume our life as it was in the past. We went back there, and the Romanian government, she couldn't get it back. It was as though she never even owned it. It was never a part of our lives. So.
You had lived in that house all your childhood?
Well, I lived for about 3 years in that house. My mother was married about 5 years before I was born, and my father owned the factory, and they did produce. They had a good income, and basically speaking, they had this house, and when I was born, I was part of the household and part of the good life that they were able to lead, because certain occupations were very much in demand. Producing textiles is one of the primary occupations, or producing food for that matter. So that was something that he could get. A European system in those days worked different. The Russians worked different. And to this day, it still works that way. If you have the appropriate occupation, and you have the appropriate skills, and you're in the right place, you can get many favors. I had an aunt who produced, she was in charge of doing custom making suits for. Well, the factory, the Russian factory that she worked in that made suits, you had to save a tremendous amount of money to buy a suit, and she would make suits for the people who produced food, and she could get food, if she did them favors, so or provided reasonable pricing for it. So it was sort of like a bartering system. If you had the right things and you knew the right people, you could get whatever you needed to get. Well, they confiscated our property, and we just didn't have any place to go. So the next part was for us to look to go to Israel. Everybody was going to Israel, and so we started to make our way to. Well, before I was going to tell you about the bag of gold. That still was with my mother, and apparently lots of people were getting out of Russia at that point. Before we got to Romania, lots of people were getting out of Russia, and my mother still had this bag of gold, and she. As we were going across the border, they were being examined. The women were taken into one place, the men were taken to another place, and they were being examined and stripped of anything they owned. You weren't going to leave Russia with anything that was worthwhile. I don't know whether the people who stripped you took it or the government kept it. It's hard to say who got but everybody had things, and everybody, and they were being, if they had them, they were being taken away. As it turned out, my mother gave me the bag and told me to go into this ravine over there to relieve myself. And I did that, and by the time I had gotten off the ravine back onto the road where the border guards were, she had been finished with her examination. She had been stripped and examined, and I got together with her, and I still had the bag, and I was on the other side. I had the bag of gold, which she took away from me, and we were on the other side, and it seems that while I was holding on to it, everything was going on. She was being examined, and the whole thing. So when we got to Romania, that's all we had was this bag of jewelry. And the way for us to make, we had to make it to Austria, to Vienna, in order to be able to get onto the displaced person camp that was in Vienna.
You're on foot this whole time?
Well, on foot, on wagons and trains, whatever you could get. We didn't have any kind of citizenship papers, and nobody was friendly. Nobody was going to let you in anywhere. So from Romania, we had to go to Hungary, and we had to every one of these places we had to wait and had to hide. This is after the war now. We have to hide because nobody wanted to have you. The Hungarians didn't want any Jews in there. They just whatever was available. If you weren't living there, they didn't really need you. So they tried to chase you out or arrest you or whatever. So we went into hiding in Hungary, in Budapest, going from Romania to Budapest. And my mother they always find people that would be willing to take a piece of jewelry to put you up, to give you food, to transport you. And this is where this jewelry became very important to us. She got us into Budapest, and then she sent me to yeshiva over there. There was a yeshiva where I could stay there all day long. And I spent 8 months in this yeshiva, but a very Hasidic place.
How old were you at this point?
This was 1947, 10 years. 46 actually, it was 9 years, going on 10. And I spent about 8 months in there, and she managed to find some things to do and make some money. I think she probably sold some jewelry on the black market and was able to get a lot of money for it. We then proceeded, finally got the indication that we could get to Vienna. Vienna's in Austria, obviously. And that's where the displaced people's camp was. In order to get there, you had to cross borders, and nobody gave you visas, and nobody permitted you to cross borders, and so you had to make arrangements again to cross borders. And there were people all along the line that worked and did that. For instance, we got across the border between Hungary and Austria by giving a guard a pound of tobacco. I mean, you know, you think about a pound of, what's a pound of tobacco? But to that guy, a pound of tobacco was like, you know, the most important thing to him. He would have cigarettes forever. So that's how we managed to get this farm lady knew where to buy the tobacco, and we would be able to give it to the guard whom she had made arrangements with, or he could have shot us. Either way, you know, it was he had the gun, and we did that at night. And well, we wound up in Vienna, and now the Hayas took over. Hayas is an organization that helped displaced people. I think it's still in existence. I haven't paid any attention lately, but they helped. They put us in this camp, and they financed this camp. And there was a large building, large school, where they would provide us with food and shelter. And we had to wait about 2 years to get on and be able to get on a boat to go to Israel. But during that time, my mother's second or third cousin got in touch with us. Through the Hayas, we found a relative, which was my mother's cousin, and he knew my mother's family very well. And my grandfather was a very pious individual who was very respected in the community, and so he knew all the children. He didn't, and he wanted to help us. So he sent us a visa to come to this country. The visa stated that we would, he didn't have to pay for the transportation, but he had to pay to produce the legal documents that we would not fall as wards of any community or any or the government or anything like this. We'd be self-sufficient. He would take care of it if we weren't. So as it turned out, we came to this country, 1949, and my mother got a job, and I promptly got a job. I was about 12 and a half years old at the time, and I was very delighted I could go to a public school. My first experience was being in a public school. I'd never gone to school before, except for the yeshiva.
Had you spoken English with your mother as a child then?
No, we spoke a whole bunch of languages. Every place we went to, we spoke Romanian. She spoke Romanian to me in Yiddish when we first started out, and then we went into Russia. And we learned Russian. I mean, she knew Russian. She had spoken Russian, but there was a lot of Russian being spoken there. And in the camp we were at, they spoke German. And you know, you pick up languages. As a child, it's easy to pick up these languages. And by the time I came to this country, I did go to a public school, but it was a Hebrew public school. It was not after the yeshiva, and I was in Austria. They had a public school, and every one of the children going to this public school was also an Israeli Boy Scout or Girl Scout. These people were going to be the future soldiers of Israel. So they did teach us math. We spoke in Hebrew and wrote everything in Hebrew. And so I had managed to pick up Hebrew as well as a language, because every day when I went to school, we spoke in Hebrew, and everything we read was in Hebrew. So aside from speaking German in Austria, my mother speaking Yiddish and Romanian to me, and all kinds of people speaking Russian. By the time I got here, I spoke everything but English. So that was kind of a situation. It wasn't very difficult to pick up English as a language, but being put into a school at 12 and a half and being put into a class 6th grade where I couldn't write my name properly in English or any other language but Hebrew, it was kind of a situation that was a little more difficult, and the children took advantage. Children can be cruel when they get you and you can't relate to them. They laugh at you, especially youngsters. So that was a short-lived thing. I managed to learn the language quickly and managed to learn how to write quickly, and I proceeded to get on with my education normally. I was just a year behind on a continual basis throughout my college career.
Where did you come when you came to the States? Where did you live?
We landed in Boston, just stayed there overnight, and then came into New York and moved into the Bronx. The Bronx in those days were good communities. In 1949, they changed later on. It changed drastically, but it was good in terms that whatever my mother was making, we could afford to live there and could afford to function. Additionally, the schools didn't cost anything. They were different than the schools, and they were free, including my college career, all the way almost the master's. I managed to get I didn't have to pay anything for but books, and that's books and laboratory fees and registration fees. Those were the only things that I really paid for. So that was a wonderful thing, I could work, I could have free education, and I proceeded to take advantage of that. Graduated college with a degree in chemistry, and had no difficulty finding a job. Proceeded to work and doing research, worked in research in various capacities to about 1972, and then I went into business for myself.
How did you end up in Columbus?
I had been working for Searle, the pharmaceutical house, and they had given me a promotion to be in charge of a research group here in Columbus, which was located at Grand Hospital. A research group was working primarily with chemistries relating to blood chemistries, and I had a bunch of labs at the hospital, and they promoted me and sent me here to run this project. They'd given me the promotion, but failed to give me the authority and the support that I thought I should have had. And the opportunity came out for me to go into business for myself. I decided that I would rather do that. I'd rather try to do my own thing than have to struggle trying to get the kind of things that I thought I should be getting as support from the company. It was a very fine company. Unfortunately, my situation didn't work out so well. It turns out fairly well. My family's done very well as a result of my having been in business for myself. Managed to get my oldest daughter through college and graduated University of Wisconsin this year. My middle daughter is now attending, she's a sophomore at Arizona State University. And my little one's a 14-year-old ninth grader at Bexley Junior High.
3 girls.
3 girls, right. My wife passed away 2 years ago from cancer, and we had been married 21 years.
Where did you meet your wife?
I met her in New York. We had gone to college together. Well, we didn't go to college together, but we met through mutual friends at party. And when we got married, we moved out to Long Island and bought ourselves a home. And I had been doing a lot of traveling for Searle throughout the country in various capacities, and so I could live almost anywhere. My schedules were merely attending meetings and working with various companies in food processing and so on, and doing other kind of chemical type things with them. And we had a nice home out in the island, and then when I got promoted by Searle, I came here to Columbus and moved in 1972.
I'd like to go back to your camp experience a little bit, if we could, back to when you were a child. I think you said when you were in Bershad, you were about 8.
I got in there 1943.
So about 8 years old.
It was actually 6.
6?
5 going on 6.
Do you have any, what are your most clear memories of the camp, just maybe what it looked like, or where you lived, how you lived?
Well, there were, we lived in this big barrack. Well, all people lived in this big barrack, and it was a place surrounded by barbed wire fences all over. A lot of soldiers there, and a lot of trucks and various tractor type things all over the place. And it was a very strict camp. The soldiers would be beaten on a continual basis. You could see punishment being meted out to the soldiers, and I think as a result of it, they took advantage of the people who were there working, their captives who were working. There were a lot of machinery where they did the laundry. I remember that because I always went through these places, big vats they washed things in.
The soldiers' uniforms?
Yeah, and there were sewing machines there, and there were press irons, people would stand there, and I guess the place was like a sweatshop, because I had experience working in sweatshops in New York when I came to the United States. The people getting beaten, I couldn't understand for what reason they were getting beatings, but it was hard to understand why. They were being abused. I hadn't know how women could be raped at that time. I was not, but later on discovered that those were the kind of things my mother would tell me, is that they would get raped too. And so I guess that was the things that I remember. I remember there was some big holes there. They would throw people in who had got killed or shot or died, and then when they filled up the holes, they just closed them up. But I was out in the field, and because I used to go out there, they had barrels of empty barrels of jam, and I'd go out there and with some of the kids, and we'd scrape the jam with our fingers and eat the jam. So you'd see out there there'd be holes, and they'd close them up. I remember there were people with uniforms in those holes too, so apparently the soldiers were treated the same way. Just when they were killed or something, or died, I think they just buried them in the same places. I imagine that's what they did with the holes in them. They'd just be covered over, and there were people in there. Of course, there was a tremendous stench, but it was quite a bit away from the area that we stayed in.
How many people were buried there?
Every so often I'd see holes, and I just see a bunch of bodies lying in them. I'm hard to say how many people. My mother could never relate to me those kind of things. She was just, I think she became a vegetable as soon as all of this, it was just too much for her. By the time she got to the camp, she had been living in so much fear and starvation and everything else, and she was just not able to cope with it. So I have, my memories are just scant of what I remember being very young, and my mother really, as a result of her being where she was and having to endure the kind of personality, she just blots it out of her mind. She just refuses to, even today she lives in fear. She hoards things, and she just doesn't relate to people the way, she's afraid everyone's going to have her put away. They're going to snitch on her. They're going to tell on her, so she doesn't relate to people too well, in terms of she doesn't permit herself to get close to people. It's hard to do that. She is afraid of people.
How old is she now?
She's 80.
And she lives?
She lives over in the Heritage Tower. And I think that she really never wanted to say anything to me. She just never wanted to talk anything to me, or with me. I had a sister who was younger, and she passed away during our travels in Russia. She passed away exposure. And I also had a brother that was older than me. But she doesn't remember my brother. She just remembers my sister. So these strange effects that these kind of things have on people.
Do you remember them?
I remember my sister. Yeah. And I guess I was separated from my brother very early. I don't, because I remember she was with us when she died.
You saw her die?
Yeah, she was with us when she died. She just didn't wake up one morning. We were out in this building, and these bricks, cement type building. We were lying in a basement, some dark place and woke up in the morning, she wasn't there. Or she didn't wake up.
What did you do with her? Your family took care of the burial then?
Well, there was no such thing as taking care of the burial. You know, there was no family. It was just my mother, I, and my sister. And my mother took her out in the field, I guess, and they had ways of dealing with these things. They were, you know, that was the kind of thing you had to deal with. There was no funeral homes and there was no hospitals to get to. If you did that, you ran into difficulties and you'd be caught. So that, it's unfortunate she won't relate to me or what happened. Maybe she's incapable of relating because she doesn't remember and blocked it all out of her mind. But visibly she suffered mentally from this whole thing. During those years that we were running around through Russia, we ran into freedom fighters on occasion. And it was easy to see why they would have freedom fighters, although there weren't too many of them. I think that these freedom fighters were like guides. They would take us from place to place. They would take us, from place to place and help us get settled. Well, what they would have to do occasionally, and my mother and some other people had told me this, is that they would kill, not only kill Germans, but they'd also kill Jews. The reason for that is all those Jews that were out there looking for favors and snitching on where other Jews were hiding with the Germans, they had to deal with them. And when I heard first that one Jew was killing another, to me it was like, how could they do that? I began to understand. There were some people who were running around and picking out, taking things away from dead people. If you were on a farm and someone died, there'd be somebody else picking up their belongings. And I understand that they managed to survive as a result of having something of value, like jewelry or things like that. But these people were very dangerous to the movement of freedom fighters, and many times they'd be killed. And it's very difficult for me to understand that, but that's what happened in those areas we were in. That's what I was told that was happening.
Other than when your father was taken, was your sister the first death that you had to visibly deal with?
Yeah. She died very early as we went on.
Do you remember how you dealt with something like that?
I really hadn't had that much exposure to her. I was about 3, going on 4, and she had been around for about a year before that, and so it was just something, a baby, and it was gone. Yeah. And I remember a baby, but I don't remember. I don't know that a year or whatever time it was long enough to develop any kind of feelings. It's not. I haven't been there long enough, really. And I think that maybe my nature, although I don't know when this developed, is I don't. I don't know whether that became as a result of having to endure things, or I've never been able to become very emotional, like break down and cry. That's never been part of my life. I just not been able to do those kind of things. And emotion, I don't evoke them as readily as other people, maybe. So maybe I don't get attached to people as readily as others, as I should, maybe. But I do remember a baby.
You think your experiences have hardened you then? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying could be. Maybe it was my nature to be hard, although my mother's capable of showing a great deal of emotions. I'm not. I don't remember ever crying. It's hard to say that. I think most people will never tell you they never cried. Guys even will admit that I just never happened to me.
Are you still close with your mother?
Yes, very close, and I love her dearly. I respect her for everything she's done for me, and I wish I could communicate with her the way I would like to, and she could relate to me the kind of things that might be valuable to me to maintain, but unfortunately, that's the way things have evolved.
I think we're running out of tape space, but are there any last comments that you'd like to make maybe to people that are just learning about the Holocaust, or just experiences, thoughts that you have, or reflections?
I think the only comment that I could make is I think that everyone should take some pride in being Jewish. I think one should never permit themselves to be put down by anybody and stand up for their rights. By being proud and by recognizing your Jewish heritage, you really preserve all of the things that have happened, and it says that it didn't happen for nothing. There was something good that happened. We have memories, and we have the ability to recognize that we are proud that we have been able to have this heritage and to maintain our heritage. It's very important, particularly at this point in our history, because the Jew is beginning to dwindle, and unless we understand what it means to be Jewish and where we come from, we're not going to have a Jewish population of any significance in the future. And I think that's my only feeling that I can express, because I cannot tell anyone what is. I can't. You can describe it, and you have to be articulate to describe. I'm not Eli Wiesel, or be able to describe, and I haven't had the kind of experience that he had, or able to put it down the way he has. But I think I've become a better Jew, and when I say a better Jew, is that I feel very, very, very close and very strong about my religion and my background, and I encourage my children to be Jewish, and I explain to them that there's something about Judaism that you cannot take away, and that's determination. And that's basically my feelings.
I really thank you for sharing your time with us and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Hope I can help.